started out standing like everyone else. And unfortunately, I'm at a stage in this progression where standing is a bit of a challenge, which is, I think, really underscores the importance of recognizing this day and providing support to the MS Society and to all of those who are living with MS. So I'm not sure if there is another copy of this resolution, Councilmember Ellison, but I'll read the first few lines and then pass it over to you.
Sounds good.
So this is a resolution recognizing March as Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month in the city of Minneapolis. Whereas multiple sclerosis, or MS, is a neurological disease of the central nervous system affecting 2.8 million people worldwide, including 1 million people here in the United States, which is double the original estimate. And whereas the National Multiple Sclerosis Society reports that more than 15,000 Minnesotans live with MS, and that the disease generally strikes people in the prime of their life, between ages 20 through 50. And the cause and the course of the often debilitating symptoms of MS remain unknown, and no cure currently exists. And whereas the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has been committed for 78 years to a world free of MS, heightening public knowledge and about and insight into the disease, and whereas since 1946.
Whereas since 1946, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has been a driving force of MS research, relentlessly pursuing prevention, treatment, and cure, and has invested more than $1 billion in groundbreaking research. And whereas funds raised through the National Multiple Sclerosis Society fuel over $30 million in annual investments for more than 200 new and ongoing MS research projects at the best medical centers, universities, and other institutions throughout the U.S. and abroad, leading to many breakthroughs in the treatment of MS. And whereas stopping MS in its tracks, restoring what has been lost, and ending MS forever is the mission of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and one that all Americans and Minnesotans should support. And whereas the city of Minneapolis recognizes the importance of finding the cause and cure of MS and expresses its appreciation for the dedication that the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has shown towards creating a world free of MS.
And now, therefore, be it resolved that the mayor and the city council do hereby recognize and uplift March 2024 as Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month in the city of Minneapolis, and that the 35W bridge will be lit up in orange this evening. Affirm March 10th through the 16th, 2024 as MS Awareness Week, and commend this observance to all of our residents. Thank you. And I want to offer an opportunity for the CEO, President, Executive Director of the MS Society here regionally, Kathleen O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, Council Member Ellison and Council Member Jenkins. The health and well-being of our individuals and communities is absolutely a team sport. So the National MS Society is grateful for our partnerships in government, nonprofits, businesses, and with individuals, including multitudes of volunteers, many of whom are here today. The MS Society exists so no one has to experience MS alone. Our mission is to cure MS while empowering people affected by MS to live their best lives, and we do that in communities. So thank you for this resolution. Thank you for your advocacy, your work, and I would just encourage all to continue to spread awareness. You probably know someone who lives with MS, even though it might not be obvious to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Is there any others who would like to say anything?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for this resolution and recognizing multiple sclerosis. I think when you first started doing this, Councilmember Jenkins, I was probably sitting much more than I am now. And like it was said, you probably know someone with MS. You don't realize it. It is not a disease, external disease that you can notice. People live with it every day, and I think Councilmember Jenkins, myself, and other people that you know and that may not know that have MS are testament to the fact that you can still live a healthy life even with MS, and with support around you is helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you all, and hope we can get a nice group photo. Do we have a photographer here?
Next, we will welcome up our guests for Women's History Month.
And I think I'm going to be joined by Councilmember Chowdhury. Good morning, good morning. Hey, Tony, good morning. How are you? Hello.
Can I do that?
Hey,
I'm gonna share that resolution.
so I think I'll stop that all with our leaders and then you do the rest.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Wow, what a day to be able to introduce two resolutions that are deeply deeply near and dear to my heart, and to really celebrate Women's History Month. We know that women have been a major force for change in this entire world, and certainly in this country, and absolutely on this city council, where we have a majority of women on this council. And so, without further ado, I will start out the resolution honoring Women's History Month. Whereas Women's History Month celebrates the contributions of women in various fields and recognizes their pivotal role in shaping society, and whereas this year's theme for International Women's Day is Inspire Inclusion, echoes the need for calls for a collective effort to forge a more inclusive world for all women, emphasizing the importance of understanding, valuing, and promoting women's inclusion in all aspects of society. Whereas we acknowledge that the women's movement has historically left out Black, Indigenous, transgender women of color, and women with disabilities, it is crucial to recognize and address the specific challenges faced by marginalized groups of women in our quest for true equality and inclusion. And whereas current city council bodies for both Minneapolis and St. Paul are worthy of recognition because the Minneapolis City Council currently has a women majority, 8 of our 13 city council members are women. And it doesn't end there, 5 of which are women of color. And the St. Paul City Council, for the first time in history, is made up entirely of women. With 6, that's incredible. With 6 of those 7 elected leaders, women of color. And whereas all women are leaders, regardless of their formal roles or leadership positions.
Whereas the City of Minneapolis continues to support opportunities within our organization where women, especially Black, Indigenous, transgender, and women of color, are equitably represented and thriving across departments and roles. Whereas to support women in the City of Minneapolis enterprise, Women was formed in 2017 as an employee resource group for those interested in the advancement and empowerment of female employees. And whereas at its initial creation, the Women ERG was called the 29% Club, which was the percentage of women working at the City of Minneapolis. And whereas the City of Minneapolis workforce is now constituted of 42.55% women, which includes 14.8% of women of color within that number. Let's get that number up. And whereas the Women ERG offers city employees opportunities for peer support, networking opportunities, a newsletter, and a policy resource group that will be deferred to as a subject matter experts on how best to support women employees in the city's workforce. Now, therefore be it resolved, the mayor and city council hereby commemorate the achievements of women in Minneapolis and beyond. We pledge to continue our efforts to promote gender equity, celebrate diversity, and support the empowerment of all women in our community. Now I wanted to acknowledge that we are joined by women, our amazing employee resource group that we mentioned in our resolution, and I'd love to give the opportunity for members of the resource group to speak and just share a little bit of the work that they've done.
Thank you, Council President Payne, council members. Thank you so much for the recognition. Women's History Month is a big part of the reason that we get together every year as a women employee resource group. And so you'll see there's lots of programming happening during the month, but we love to connect with each other anytime. It's really a space where we can experiment with bringing a little bit more of our whole selves, as we know we can't do that in our day-to-day very often. As Council Member Chowdhury mentioned, we have come a long way in bringing women into employees at the City of Minneapolis, but that percentage of women of color is still very low, and we have a ways to go. But yeah, so thank you so much for the recognition, and look forward to events happening this month throughout the city. Thank you.
Anyone else want to share any thoughts about Women's History Month?
Love it.
I just wanted to say I'm Gretchen Peterson. I work for Minneapolis Traffic. I'm a crew leader, and I'm proud of the boots on the ground workers out there and Locals 363. We really appreciate you guys voting for our contract, and I just am proud to be a member of the workforce at the City of Minneapolis. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Can we get a photo together? I think Amy will take a picture of us.
Squeeze in,
Yes,
ladies.
squeeze in, ladies. Yeah, we do. Do our little. We'll open up the resolution.
Yeah,
Do a little bit of you. Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you.
Next, we will welcome our guests for recognizing Ramadan.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. But this is broken down.
this just so we know
Yeah.
who's speaking?
No,
I think we'll be okay.
we're gonna pass
We'll-
this
we'll-
one.
We'll
here.
hold it like this so then we can, our.
You want to grab the other mic?
That's good.
Okay, are we in the order? Why don't you get next to me on this side? It's
Yes.
and then Osman and it's you. Okay, we'll call up all of our guests for the Ramadan 2024 resolution, and then if there are members of the audience that are a part of the Muslim community that feel inclined to join, you are more than welcome to join us up here if you'd like. You want to go around the other way? Wonderful. I'll just kick off by saying my name is Councilmember Oreen Chowdhury. This is my first Ramadan spent on the City Council, and I'm really proud to say that on the Minneapolis City Council, we now have 4 members of the Muslim caucus. And now 2 of them are women in the Muslim community. And I'm just so proud to be joined by our community this morning as we commemorate the observance of Ramadan 2024 and its significance to Muslims in Minneapolis. So, whereas Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, is a period of fasting, reflection, devotion, generosity, and sacrifice observed by Muslims around the world, including those in our diverse city of Minneapolis.
And whereas this holy month commemorates the revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, a guide for personal spiritual growth, social justice, and the welfare of society. And
whereas during Ramadan, Muslims engage in a fast from dawn to sunset, a deep contemplation of their faith, increased charitable giving, and community involvement, embodying the value of empathy, community service, and interfaith harmony.
And whereas Muslims have been part of the fabric of America for over 400 years since the first Muslims in America arrived as enslaved people. And
whereas the Muslim community in Minneapolis has significantly contributed to cultural, economic, social, and spiritual livelihood in our city, enriching our community's diversity through their cultural traditions, values, and civic engagement. And
whereas the spirit of Ramadan fosters an environment of communal support and solidarity, encouraging members of the Muslim community in Minneapolis to volunteer, support local charities, and engage in acts of kindness that benefit the less fortunate, underscoring the deep-rooted Islamic principles of compassion and community service. And
whereas Eid al-Fitr, the celebration marking the end of Ramadan, brings together people of various backgrounds for prayers, feasts, and communal gathering, fostering a spirit of unity and mutual respect among all residents, as well as gratitude for the strength and patience practiced throughout the holy month. And
whereas mosques around the city can celebrate this Ramadan and every day with the centuries-old call to prayer observed by Muslims around the world. And
whereas Ramadan is expected to commence at dusk on Sunday, March 10th, and will last for a lunar month. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the mayor and city council recognize and commemorate the month of Ramadan beginning, inshallah, on the evening of Sunday, March 10th, and concluding on the evening of Tuesday, April 9th, 2024, as a time of spiritual reflection, self-improvement, and heightened devotion for Muslim Americans in Minneapolis. Be it further resolved that this resolution is dedicated to Islamic organizations in Minneapolis in recognition of their spiritual leadership, contributions to the community, and to enhance awareness and appreciation of the rich cultural and religious diversity in our city.
Ramadan Mubarak, early Ramadan Mubarak. I want to thank my colleagues. This means a lot to us. I would like to welcome Sheikh Abdullah Yusuf to give us a little brief of what Ramadan is in the community and how important it is.
Thank you so much, Council Jamal Usman, the President of the Council, all the Muslim and other council members of this beautiful city that we all belong to. It is an honor for all of us and to welcome Ramadan in the city of Minneapolis. This means a lot to us. It is a great recognition. Muslims are fabric and part of the community, larger community of the United States. And to recognize Ramadan, the beginning of Ramadan, by the city of Minneapolis is inclusion and understanding and being part of the big family. I would like to say 3 things about Ramadan, and most of you know what Ramadan means. It's month of fasting. The first lesson of Ramadan is to have a self-restraint, self-discipline, self-control, and reflect on yourself and how to be a better person. The second one is to have empathy and compassion for those who are hungry and thirsty, so that you feel exactly the same pain that they're feeling. And the third spirituality in it is that of the family and connection. And finally, everything comes together. In the month of Ramadan, we get closer to God through prayers, through reflection, and through self-consciousness. We really appreciate this opportunity today and this resolution, and we thank the leadership of the city council members, and all the community in the city of Minneapolis, and those who came here today. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much. I would just like to recognize that we're joined also by Representative Mahmoud Noor, who is a member of the Muslim caucus in the state delegation and the Minneapolis delegation. And then I'm going to pass it off to Asma, who is representing RISE, Reviving Islamic Sisterhood Empowerment. I thank you so much for being here and being willing to speak.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Asma Muhammad Nizami. This is the first year I did not put up Ramadan decorations in my house. And it is because my people in Palestine are suffering, and because this is not the time to celebrate for many Muslims around the world. Last year, I got the pleasure and honor of visiting Palestine, and one of the biggest parts of Ramadan is the night of power. We call it Laylatul Qadr. And during that night, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, traveled to Masjid al-Aqsa. And when I was in Masjid al-Aqsa, there were children, Palestinian children, all around me. And during the month of Ramadan, that masjid is stormed by the Israeli army every year. And I want us to remember that and hold that, and remember that there are millions in northern Gaza who are starving, who for fasting for them is an everyday occurrence, and it is not by choice. So as we are fasting, as you are holding that empathy, remember them and pray for them. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to our Ummah for being here today. I'll ask if there's anyone else that would like to give any remarks, or if any of my colleagues would like to say anything that are up here today. Good, then we can get a photo together. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, the women can be together. Come over here, Aisha. You want to hold this, Asma? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, and that completes our presentation of honorary resolutions. I would like to welcome everyone into this meeting, but both to those who are present in the chambers and those monitoring from outside the chamber. I'm Elliot Payne, the president of Minneapolis City Council, and it's my pleasure to call this regular meeting of the City Council to order for Thursday, March 7th. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to prove the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Chaudhry.
Present.
Councilmember Cashman.
Present.
Councilmember Osman.
Present.
Councilmember Rainville. Absent. Councilmember Chavez.
Present.
Councilmember Vitaw.
Present.
Councilmember Ellison.
Here.
Councilmember Koski.
Present.
Councilmember Wansley.
Present.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Present.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Present.
Councilmember Rainville is present. Vice President Shugtai.
Present.
President Payne.
Present.
There are 13 members present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Colleagues, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Chaudhry.
Present. Aye. Sorry.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vitaw.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries and the agenda is adopted. The next item is acceptance of the minutes from our regular meeting on February 22nd. I'd entertain a motion to accept those minutes.
So moved.
Second. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Chaudhry.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vitaw.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries and those minutes have been accepted. Finally, we have the referral of petitions, communications, and reports to proper committees. May I have that motion, please?
So moved.
Second. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Chaudhry.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vitaw.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries and those matters have been referred. The next order of business is the presentation of reports from our standing committees. Those are taken in alphabetical order, beginning with the report of our Administration and Enterprise Oversight Committee, which will be presented by its chair, Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, President Payne. The AO committee is bringing forward 28 items for approval. The first being a passage of resolution, gift acceptance from Communities First Infrastructure Alliance of travel and lodging expenses. Number 2 is accepting bid for hot mix asphalt. 3 is accepting bid for traffic marketing thermoplastic. Number 4 is accepting bid for phone system maintenance. Number 5 is authorizing contract with Cal America for online permitting services. Number 6 is authorizing contract with Zan Associates for layout, engineering, and design services for the Northside Greenway Phase 1 and 2 project. 7 is authorizing contract amendment with Content Architects LLC for website services consulting. Number 8 is authorizing contract amendment with States Manufacturing for the Fridley Campus Electrical Rehabilitation Construction Project. Number 9 is authorizing contract amendment with CDM Smith for engineering, design, and construction oversight services for the Fridley Campus Electrical Rehabilitation Project. Number 10 is authorizing a contract amendment with Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman LLP for continued IT sourcing consulting services. Number 11 is authorizing contract amendments with Change Equals Opportunity and Change Starts With Community for youth group violence intervention work, also known as YGVI. Number 12 is authorizing contract amendment with Lockridge Grindle Newen PLLP for legal panel services. 13 is approving legal settlement Marksdale v. City of Minneapolis and Irvin D. Hetchel. And then items 14 through 26 are approving legal settlements related to worker comps claims. And then 27 is approving a legislative directive on workforce culture. And then number 28 is authorizing a collective bargaining agreements with the Minneapolis Association Fire Chiefs 2022 and 2023 through 2025. With that, I will separate items 27 and then 14 through 24 for separate discussion.
Councilmember Wansley has moved the committee's report for approval. We will take up items 14 through 24 as a separate vote, as well as item 27 as a separate vote. I will now recognize Councilmember Chavez for discussion.
Thank you, Council President Payne. I'd like to comment on item number 2. I'm glad that this contract with Bituminous Roadways will be in the Columbus plant rather than in East Phillips, so I'll be voting in favor of this particular bid. This action is responsive to the concerns of residents of Ward 9 who have for too long faced the burden of pollution and asked for these contracts to not happen in East Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I will also recognize Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, President Payne. I just wanted to make a comment about item 11, which is the contract amendments for Change Equals Opportunity and Change Starts With Community. I had great meeting with Director Nelson Brown. I had lots of questions about these contracts. I'm happy that she was able to, about the Change Starts With Community contract. Why GVI is different than GVI. It's a youth focus, so I really wanted to understand what these two groups are doing in particular around Northside Family. So thank you to Director Nelson Brown for answering my questions, and I look forward to voting for these.
Thank you for that comment. Is there any discussion on items 1 through 23 and item number 26? Oh, I'm sorry, items 1 through 13 and item number 26. Seeing no discussion, I will have the clerks call the roll on items 1 through 13 and 25, 26, and 28. I'll have the clerks call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osmond.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
Those items carry. Next, we will take up items 14 through 24. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll have. These are the workers' comps claims. We'll take up those as a separate vote. Is there any discussion on those items? Seeing none, I will have the clerks call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osmond.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
No.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Nay.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Nay.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 10 ayes and 3 nays.
Those items carry. Next, we will take up item 27, and I will recognize Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, President Payne. I move to amend item 27, improving workforce culture legislative directive, as outlined in the amendment before you. I gave notice Monday at the committee of the whole meeting that I would be bringing forward this amendment and sent the notice via email to council members, council staff, and city clerks. The amendment requests additional information and extends the timeline to accommodate for that request. As mentioned at the committee of the whole meeting, I had been working on a draft legislative directive requesting information and data on the city's attrition issues. Last week, I met with Councilmember Wansley to discuss this work, amongst other things, and Councilmember Wansley made me aware of the Improving Workforce Culture Legislative Directive. In the interest of consolidating our work, Councilmember Wansley invited me to amend this directive rather than bringing forward a separate legislative directive. I'd like to thank Councilmember Wansley for that invitation and for co-authoring my motion. The amendment requests additional information regarding the city's attrition trend over the past 10 years, all data collection strategies used to collect data on the city's attrition, how the data we collect is compiled, analyzed, and tracked ongoing, and the data we've collected over the past 5 years. Thank you for considering this amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Koski. Councilmember Koski has moved item number 27 with an amendment. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Rainville? Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Rainville and Council President Payne. I guess I'm just trying to understand. I mean, we know we do have these challenges. What's the intended outcome of this legislative directive?
I will recognize Councilmember Koski, and if needed, Councilmember Wansley.
Sure, thank you, Council President Payne and Councilmember Jenkins. I think that the outcome of this is just making sure that we have an understanding of, with data, of why we have some of the attrition issues that we have. We can't improve ourselves, and I think it's important for us as a body to know that information as well. So it's not information that's readily been available, so hence why doing the legislative directive. I can speak to that piece of this, but I will turn it to Councilmember Wansley to add more.
I'll recognize Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President Payne, and also thank you, Councilmember Koski. You're absolutely correct in terms of the intentionality behind bringing this legislative directive is for us to gain a better understanding of HR trends as it relates to attrition, but also if you can see from points 1 through 3, it's also about, again, just giving us an overview of how we can improve culture, conduct. Are there any changes that we should be made aware of in regards to our city's anti-discrimination, harassment, and retaliation procedures since 2020? Again, all good information to have as we're thinking through of how we improve the internal culture within the city enterprise. And then again, asking staff, what are some recommendations that we can consider as a body to, support the improvement of that culture. I also want to highlight that in the committee, this legislative directive was also complemented by a public comment period where a number of community leaders, such as those from the Twin Cities Urban League and the Black Civic Network, but we had a number of community leaders also talk about, even as outsiders, concerns around our HR practices and the ways in which they're impacting not only just city employees, but as you can also see from the legislative directive of also how these impacts might be differing amongst employees of color. So I think this is another case where having information about these trends can help us better respond to HR issues, improve the workforce culture, which I think that's a shared goal. That is a goal that is also, guiding the work of the AO committee. So that is where the rationale and the intentionality came from behind this legislative directive.
Thank you, Councilmember Wansley. Councilmember Jenkins?
No, thank you. I mean, I appreciate this. I really think that, one of our biggest challenges is what I call a brain drain from the city of Minneapolis, and hopefully this will lead to some of that. We know that pay structures are a very significant part of the attrition, and that surrounding communities are paying more for very similar work that happens here at the city, and that has to be a part of our thought process moving forward. So, you know, I think some of these other issues that are outlined here may play a role, but I believe, personally, I believe that compensation is a big driver in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rainville.
Council President Payne, can I just have a quick response?
Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you. Also, Councilmember Jenkins, I invite every council member too. So we're going to be approving our work plan in AO, and I know there is a section to address exactly what you're talking about in terms of workforce recruitment and retention. A number of council members identified that as a key priority, and as you highlighted, how are we looking at metrics like pay? So I just want to highlight too, if definitely be on the lookout for our work plan. It's currently up on LIMS, I believe. And if there's things like that you're seeing that's missing, please let me know, and we can, more than happily include that before, when's our next meeting? Monday's AO's meeting.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councilmember Jenkins, for your wisdom about the pay issue. We are in a very competitive situation with our employees, and pay is so much important, especially police. Their contract is long overdue. But I'm wondering if one of the authors could speak to, is this enough time for our staff to do this? I was looking at the date in June, and this just seems like a lot of information. Is that fair to the staff? Have you asked them if they have enough time to do this?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Rainville. I'll note that I don't know that there are staff here that can answer that, but
I can speak to
Councilmember Wansley.
Yeah, so we have been in touch with HR, and we, as authors, felt that 3 months is definitely a sufficient amount of time to give staff, what they need to be able to produce this information.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Chowdhury.
Thank you, President Payne, and thank you, Councilmember Koski and Councilmember Wansley, for bringing this forward. I do plan on being at the AO committee when this is presented. I think this is an opening to an important conversation that we need to have as city council members in our tool around oversight and evaluation and supporting our workforce within the city of Minneapolis. I appreciate our conversations about pay scale that we've already started up there, and I think that's important to highlight. I think I will just share, just being staff within the city since 2019, taking different roles, and now as council member, certainly a lot of the issues that existed around culture were exacerbated during the pandemic and then following, but did exist prior. And I have heard stories from staff that have left our city from across departments because they ended up finding a job in another city and just feeling happier and more supported, and that indicated to me that the workplace culture here has great strides to improve, especially for women and people of color within our city. I also understand that there are staff members who have left our city, that brain drain that council member Jenkins was talking about, and have taken pay cuts in different roles just to feel like they were valued within the work that they were. And we need to take care of our own house, and we need to improve it. The first step is acknowledging that there is a problem, and a lot of those problems were exacerbated during the pandemic and when people were working from home. And I think one thing I'll note that I hope out of this comes is a chance for a follow-up. I think it's actually going to open up more of a conversation and potentially another legislative directive looking at the work that we put on rank and file staff around diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we're asking staff of color, staff representing the disability community or staff who are women or part of our LGBTQIA community to do unpaid labor around improving workplace culture around inclusion and creating steps to provide metrics that make the city of Minneapolis meet goals that make us look good around diversity and inclusion. And that's something that I was approached by multiple city staff recently about, and I think that's worth noting in the future for a conversation that could be a follow-up to this one. So I just wanted to state that for the record. I think this is an opening to an important conversation to the work that will take place in this term.
Thank you, Councilmember Chowdhury. Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, President Payne. I just wanted to add a couple thoughts about this too as the conversation has evolved. Prior to being on the council, I worked for an individual who started a professional development platform that helped people understand how they're motivated at work. And, having this information and data will really help us get to kind of the core reasons. I think we're all here as public servants, and the professional development platform that my friend had developed, really analyzed, how are people motivated? Is it by impact, culture, praise, prestige, pay? We've talked about a few of those here today, and what that looks like. We talked about our ERG groups, and that's creating better culture. We talked about pay, but there's many reasons why people stay in the work and continue to work here in the city of Minneapolis, and there are also probably many reasons why they maybe move on to another job. And I think understanding that is only going to make us a better city, and make us make sure that we're providing the best services for our residents.
Thank you, Councilmember Koski. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this legislative directive. I appreciate digging into this in a lot of the technical ways that we are, as well as I too have heard firsthand that oftentimes the DEI work in our city falls on the backs of our diverse, of the diversity and of the minorities that work in our city. And that's not fair, and it can be very tiring and exhausting, and I'm not sure how to change that specifically without directing departmental policy, but I think there is a way to do that. What I struggle with here in this conversation as a whole is that this doesn't seem to include the way city staff are treated in this chamber. And this doesn't include the way that city staff are treated in council offices. So this is pretty technical and it's all fine, but I sure hope we take a hard look at ourselves through this work. We need to be honest too. And I look forward to furthering that conversation about how we as a body and as leaders are also going to improve this culture here too. So I just needed to say that out loud. It seemed like a weird elephant in the room here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Councilmember Rainville.
Councilmember Palmisano, thank you for your wisdom. How appropriate as we start Ramadan that we inject kindness into our conversations, especially kindness to our staff from us, the 13 of us sitting up here. We all owe that to everybody and especially our staff. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you, Councilmember Rainville. Is there any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will ask the roll on item 27 as amended by Councilmember Koski.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and that full report is now adopted. The next report is from our Budget Committee, and that report will be presented by that committee's chair, Vice President Chugtai.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Budget Committee is bringing forward 7 items for adoption today. Item number 1 is an appointed position in the city attorney's office for the managing attorney positions. And then item number 2 is appointed position in the city attorney's office, managing attorney for implementation. Item number 3 is an appointed position in the city attorney's office for deputy city attorney. Item number 4 is an appointed position in the City Auditor's Office for Director of Policy and Research. Item number 5 is an appointed position in the City Attorney's Office, which is Director of Oversight and Evaluation. Item number 6 is an appointed position in the Office of Community Safety, Director of Community Safety and Community Safety Administration. And then item number 7 is an appointed position in the Health Department, Director, Climate Equity Action. I move approval of the Budget Committee's report.
Vice President Chugtai has moved approval of the Budget Committee's report. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vito.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries and the report is adopted. Next, we'll have the report from our Business, Housing, and Zoning Committee, which will be given by that committee's chair, Councilmember Osman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Business, Housing, and Zoning Committee is bringing forward 11 items for approval. Item 1 is the TNC ordinance to establish minimum driver compensation. Item 2 is a business subsidized for George Mutual Innovation Solution. Item 3 is 2 liquor license approval. Item 4 is 14 liquor license renewal. Item 5 is 3 gambling license. Item 6 is amending the 2024 license fee schedule related to the tow truck services. Item 7 is environmental covenant for 2704 29th Avenue South. Item 8 is approving financial assistance for Hennepin County for 3 affordable housing projects. Item 9 is approving amendment to the comp plan for a portion of the property at 1315 University Avenue Southeast. Item 10 is accepting a grant related to the African American Historic and Cultural Content Study. Item 11 is revision to the 4D Affordable Housing Initiative Program guidelines. I will move approval for all items except item 1, which I will pull out for a separate discussion and vote. Thank you.
Councilmember Osman has moved approval of the committee's report and has pulled item 1 for a separate discussion and vote. Is there any discussions on items 2 through 7? Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, President Payne. I did want to comment on item number 5. I think there's a typo in the All God's Children Metropolitan Community Church. It's actually 3104 Park Avenue as opposed to 2104. So if we can make that correction, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you for those eagle eyes. Do the clerks note that?
We've noted it. We'll need to check with the license, which came through from CPED, and make the correction if it's true.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you. Just wanted to, we talked about this at committee, but just wanted to highlight item 2, which is the George Modular Project. We spent just a minute ago talking about, workforce culture, worker pay. We're going to be taking up an item talking about worker pay in a moment, and just wanted to highlight that we've got folks in our community who are looking to create jobs, good paying jobs, and just so happens to be in my ward, so that doesn't hurt either, and it's it's one of those projects that's going to be a solution, I think, to some of the issues we face with the housing crisis, some of the issues we face with livable wages, and so just wanted to lift that up as a sort of a good news item that we're going to be able to vote on in just a moment here. So that's all.
Thank you for that comment. Any other discussion on items 2 through 7? Seeing none, the clerk. Oh, I'm sorry. 2 through 11. The clerks will call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vito.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and those items are adopted. Next, I will recognize Councilmember Wansley for a brief presentation on item 1. As you know, we had a pretty long committee of the whole meeting this Monday, and Councilmember Wansley had prepared a presentation for committee, but we ran out of time due to constraints with the Planning Commission. I will recognize Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President Payne. You gave a pretty good overview as to how we're having a presentation today to give our colleagues some things to consider prior to not only taking a vote, but I know there will be some discussion about the ordinance. With that, I'm going to kick it over to actually my co-author and colleague, Councilmember Osmond, to dig into the first slide about how we got here and just providing some context.
Thank you, Council. Thank you so much. Colleagues, drivers came to us in the City Hall the fall of 2022. They came outside, and I brought some of you on the hall to greet them, and some of you were asking why all these drivers are here. Majority of the drivers that we see are East African minority immigrant community that move our city forward. They came to us because they were wanted to talk to us about the low and unpredictable wages they received, not protected by the existing labor regulations, including the $15.57 municipal minimum wage, existing regulation in Seattle and New York and North Stars. I wanted to tell you that this work has been going on for 2 years. The drivers you see on the audience today have came to different community comments or public hearing in numbers. Last Tuesday, they came and talked to us and explained and told us the conditions they are in. They deserve protection like everyone else. The protection like everyone else in city of Minneapolis. We're asking you, colleagues, these are drivers are not from outside the city. Majority of them live in city of Minneapolis. Majority of them are minority immigrants from my ward. I'm here to listen to them. We have the work, and they have, I really want to take the time and thank them, the work and hard work and organizing they did. I'm so proud of you being here this morning, waiting so long, and coming to us and talking to us. And I really want to especially thank my colleagues for really asking many questions, the colleagues that have worked on with me on this ordinance. And I want to pass it to Councilmember Wansley for additional information on the presentation.
Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President Payne. If we can go back to the slides. So actually, my colleague and co-author, Councilmember Chavez, will take the next 4 slides, and then I'll dive into the remainder.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, President Payne and Councilmember Wansley. The legislative process included the following. The Fair Drive Safe Ride Ordinance, the ordinance we passed last year, included minimum compensation, workers' rights, and safety protections for both drivers and riders. It was written in consultation with drivers, national experts, and our own city staff. Every single council member was offered briefings with us, the co-authors, with CPED, the CAO in the summer and fall of 2023. Us authors held public information sessions in the summer of 2023 where the public was engaged. Every council member had the ability to bring amendments through the standard legislative process. For example, you'll see a variety of them today. And just last year, Councilmember Jenkins also authored an amendment to increase rates to ensure access for people with disabilities. The last ordinance passed with 7 votes in August of 2023, which was then vetoed by Mayor Fry. And then there was a rate study that was conducted in early 2023 by CPED staff in conversations with national experts. This is what we're bringing forward today. If you want to read it, it's LIMS file 2023-00583, and it has a minimum compensation memo. That's where you can find it. It was calculated with the per minute and per mile rates that equal Minneapolis' minimum wage. For example, 51 cents per minute, and $1.40 per mile. And the associated cost factors were the federal mileage reimbursement, the cost of fuel, vehicle maintenance, and breaks consistent with labor law. It's highly specific to the municipal context here in Minneapolis. After the veto, there was broad agreement from council members that drivers should earn a minimum wage. This led us, the three co-authors, to moving the ordinances separately, isolating minimum compensation, introducing that as a standalone ordinance to find common agreement. We're going to be moving forward on the second part of the ordinance later on. There was council and mayor engagement. Us three co-authors offered to meet with every single council member to gather input in order to address their concerns. We even met with the mayor, then he offered Model B. When we met with the council members, there was a different proposition being moved forward, which was Model C, and those three were studied through our legislative department. All compensation models were gathered from these meetings and were assessed in the comparative rate study, which is LIMS file 2024-00110. And the study confirmed which rates are closest to equivalent to minimum wage based on these studies. So I'll pass it on to Councilmember Wansley.
Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Council Member Chavez. So that brings us to the compensation proposal that you're being asked to consider today, which is Model A, which was also part of that PAR analysis that Councilmember Chavez recommended. We found through that analysis that in order to get to $15.57 minimum wage equivalent, we would have to go through, the per mile per minute recommendation of $1.40 per mile, and then 51 cents per minute. We also, again, did a thorough analysis of the other comparable alternatives that came from both the mayor and our fellow council members. That ended up being Model B in terms of the Mayor Fry's proposal, that at that time he has secured an agreement with, I believe, Uber. And that recommendation was $1.17 per mile and then 34 cents per minute. What we found through our analysis, or what PAR found through their analysis to supplement our original CPAD analysis, is that those rates were not minimum wage equivalents. They also were not supported by the state legislator and also not recommended by the work group that was created post Governor Walz vetoing the rideshare legislation last summer. So we also, had consideration for Model C, which was a $24 flat rate, which again did not equate to a minimum wage equivalent. And then we can move forward to the next slide. So we also, as Councilmember Chavez highlighted, we're going to be moving forward a second component of the ordinance, which is safe rides. That is where we get to dig into some of the things that you all have identified as a need, which is the need for more data disclosure. But also we've heard that, Lyft or rideshare companies have been forthcoming with some of their own data to council in the, recent weeks. One of which I'm pretty sure you all have received is Lyft's own white paper on their earnings, or drivers' earnings. We just want to provide a couple points as someone and as a co-author has read that report. One thing to highlight is that the report does not focus on Minneapolis and specifically Minneapolis drivers. What the study did do was provide an overview of cities nationwide, but it did lack relevant information that would support and aid in creating a minimum wage floor for drivers here in Minneapolis. Also, something to keep in mind about the white paper that Lyft sent over is that Lyft actually considers tips and bonuses as part of wages. And this is in direct contradiction to our existing statewide policy here in Minnesota, being that we are a one fair wage state, meaning we pay a full minimum wage without counting tips. This is a significant labor protection that we have here, and introducing a tip penalty for drivers would set a very dangerous precedent to weaken a significant labor protection that workers fought hard for. So we wanted to provide some context for the Lyft paper. We are, thankful that, Lyft sent that over for us to be able to review and see the ways in which it contrasted to our own analysis here in Minneapolis. And then going to the next slide. So we also know there has been ongoing conversations. You probably also heard this from Mayor Fry too, around, the need to just raise or double pay for drivers. And we want to make sure that you all know as co-authors that those are not the same thing. Minimum wage equivalence means that we are creating a policy, and in this case, closing a loophole in our existing $15 minimum wage policy, so that we're getting drivers on par with the rest of the 70,000 workers who already have this protection across Minneapolis. That's very different than just doing a raise. And to give a brief example of this, let's say if a driver was making $5 an hour, if we just simply doubled their income to $10 an hour, that means, we would be accomplishing the goal of paying them more, but not accomplishing our goal and our existing policy of getting them to a Minneapolis minimum wage equivalent. So just recognizing those are two different things. I want to move to the next slide. We also have heard concerns from colleagues, of course, around how will this impact riders. Specifically, will this lead to increased rates for riders? Will it make it unaffordable? And I think it's really important to refer back to the memo that Amy Lingo, who works in our CPED department, the memo that she sent to council members earlier this week, which actually confirmed that there is no evidence that driver compensation increases were actually responsible for price increases. Her memo actually also highlights that price increases in Seattle happened at the same time where there were increases in other cities where there was no minimum wage increases at all. So seeing that there's not always a correlation between, raising wages and then the raising of rates for riders. So, we just want to make sure that folks have that understanding and know that, drivers have even brought this to our attention, that fare increases for our riders is often arbitrary, and then it's not then related to labor costs. So we also want to highlight again the second ordinance of safe rides, where if our colleagues are concerned about, fair transparency for riders in particular, we would welcome every single one of you to be part of our legislative development process for that ordinance, because that's where we're going to get to dive deep into the transparency piece. And then next slide. So, of course, we have also heard this big talking point as to why we should not move forward with this ordinance in terms of Uber and Lyft leaving. I also want to highlight that yesterday the National Employment Law Project sent a letter of support for this ordinance to all council members, and they also shared a lengthy overview of basically Uber and Lyft's track record of making these particular threats to leave places that have pursued regulation. Their threats to leave have basically been leveraged in cities and states all across the country, like in Phoenix, in Seattle, and in Illinois. And I want to note, in those cities, each time those threats were made, the elected officials there ignored those threats and moved forward with their, regulation that they were pursuing, and Uber and Lyft did not leave in those places. I think we often know, and anyone who's done work around advancing worker protections, we will hear this from larger businesses that they will leave. It's an intimidation tactic, and I'm glad that it's one that did not work in those respective cities, and hopefully today we will show it will not work here in Minneapolis. I know you all also received emails from a driver co-op in New York that they are ready to begin licensing to operate here in the near future should Uber and Lyft decide to leave and this ordinance passes. I believe, again, they reached out to each council office too to introduce themselves as a driver-owned company that does reinvest in the community and builds economic power for drivers. And they are excited to operate here and also are excited to do so while paying the minimum wage. So I encourage council members to check out their business model and their plans for nationwide expansion and to look at their annual report, which is located on their website. These are the type of businesses that, can exist here that do want to support wealth creation, but also know that does not come at expense with paying their workers what they deserve, which is the minimum wage compensation. And they're ready to step up.
Councilmember Wansley, are you ready to transition to discussion, or are there more slides?
There are more slides. Just a couple more. Yep.
let's work through those pretty quickly because we have a few folks in queue.
Sounds good. So again, just wanted to highlight this piece, and then also, again, we have public options in addition to rideshare companies coming in and ready to, take up the void should Uber and Lyft leave. One of those being Metro Mobility. I sent you all an email too this morning with a memo from Metro Mobility saying that they are ready to absorb increased participation from residents with disabilities with their own type of TNC on-demand service that only costs $5 an hour. And then we can move over to the state legislative policy slide. I know council members have heard that at some point maybe a study will be coming forward from the Department of Labor and Industry as a supplemental research study, and it sounds like that's great information to have for the statewide program. But we also have the research that we need here to move forward with our own policy that gets drivers to a $15 minimum wage and nothing less. And that was a study that was done by and for the city of Minneapolis, and I want to thank CPED staff for doing that and for creating a study that used static factors like mileage reimbursements, federal laws around brakes, the cost of fuel, the cost of vehicle maintenance to create that compensation formula that get us to Model A that's included in this ordinance. So I'm really excited for us to move into the rest of the discussion. We have a historic opportunity to join cities and states like Seattle and New York and Arizona to pass historic regulation and make sure that our drivers are getting the minimum wage that, again, over 70,000 workers across Minneapolis already earn, and that council made sure to take action to ensure and guarantee to our workers back in 2018. So with that, open for discussion.
Thank you for that presentation, Councilmember Wansley. I will recognize Councilmember Koski, and just to give a heads up, there are a number of amendments to this, and I believe each of these amendments are fairly complementary to each other, but I will recognize Councilmember Koski to introduce her amendment.
Thank you, President Payne. Yes, I am one of 3 amendments, I believe, coming forward. So I'd like to move to amend item number 1, Transportation Rideshare Worker Protection Ordinance, as outlined in the amendment that all of you have before you. I gave notice Monday at the Committee of the Whole meeting that I would be bringing forward this amendment, and I also did this via email. This amendment institutes regular external evaluations of the impacts of the ordinance to take place 6 months after the implementation date, 1 year after the implementation date, and annually each year after. The purpose of this amendment is to ensure that we seek and maintain clear data which shows the impacts of this ordinance on TNC companies, on the drivers and passengers in the city of Minneapolis and throughout the region, so that in the future we can review and adjust the ordinance if necessary.
Thank you for that introduction. And clerks, maybe you can assist me on this process because I would ultimately like to move this as one item. So should we take up votes on each of these amendments separately and then have a discussion on the full package?
Yeah.
Okay. I will have the clerks call the roll on the Koski amendment.
Need a second.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
We're not going to have discussion on the amendments. We're going to just
We
vote
can have
through
a
them.
discussion on the amendment if you would prefer.
I would prefer.
Okay. I'll recognize Councilmember Chowdhury for discussion on this amendment.
Councilmember Koski, I just want to kind of get an understanding on like how you got to 6 months and 1 year as different points for evaluation. That was one question that just popped up for me for this amendment today.
I'll recognize Councilmember Koski to answer that question.
Thank you, President Payne and Councilmember Chowdhury. So I felt that this is an important, it's important for us to evaluate this closer in, like short term. If we utilize just 1 year out, I think we're missing a lot of data and information that we could pivot quickly. We may find that we don't have the right formula for drivers. We may not be paying enough. I want to make sure that we're evaluating that quick enough so that we can pivot more rapidly. And I think we're going to be able to see some of those changes earlier on, and then so that's why I felt like then 1 year after would be sufficient. I also believe that this will give us some time to learn a little bit more about what's going to happen at the state and how this will coincide with what we're doing together.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Is it, President Payne, Councilmember Koski, is it a correct attribution that like this allows for us in 6 months, if we feel like we need to make changes to the ordinance to better match Minneapolis and the needs of drivers and riders, this would create an opportunity?
Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, President Payne. I think we can obviously change the ordinance at any time. However, I think being able to have these kind of stop gaps, these moments of time where we're getting the information and having time to evaluate is imperative so that we are doing the best for the drivers. I mean, I know that that's our end goal here, is to make sure that we're supporting the drivers, and I believe also making sure that we're creating stability for both drivers and riders and having that moment of time to evaluate it. But if we don't ask for the data, it's not necessarily going to come to us. So I think we need to make sure that we're asking for it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I also noticed that this creates an opportunity to see if the claims that Uber and Lyft are leveraging have a validity, and I think that's an important stopgap that was necessary for other cities that kind of face certain threats of leaving or price increases. So I appreciate this amendment, and I will be supporting it.
May I respond quick?
Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Councilmember Chowdhury. Yes, I think we've heard a lot of discussion here too about potential other rideshare businesses coming into the market potentially. So I think having a 6 months evaluation for them is also really important.
Thank you for that commentary. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of this, as we should be evaluating all of our ordinances. But I do regret that this would happen after the fact. It sort of seems like this is about doing the homework for the exam after we've already made a decision to go in one direction. So while it's important to keep tabs on this, especially because this is pretty new legislation, it does seem a little too much after the fact, and I wish there were an opportunity to work with the state in implementing a more regional policy. So I will be supportive of this amendment and others today, but I am not supportive of moving forward on this ordinance at this time without the work and consideration of the information coming forward from the state.
Thank you for that commentary. Any other discussion on the specific amendment in front of us? Seeing none, I will ask the clerks to call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Nay.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
No.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes and 2 nays.
That amendment carries. I have a number of folks in queue on the underlying motion, but we do have 2 other motions in front of us for amendments, and I would like to take those up first. So I will recognize Councilmember Rainville to introduce his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to add a brief addition to this data collection that's being offered, and my motion reads, all evaluation and reporting should include the impact of the ordinance on people with disabilities, low-income communities, hours worked by drivers, and the added cost of enforcement by the city. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I will recognize Councilmember Chavez.
Council President Payne, thank you. I actually will be voting in favor of this amendment by Councilmember Rainville, but I do have a question for the city attorney. I had this conversation with Councilmember Rainville, but I want it to be noted for the public record in case we have to go through the courts. Did you work with the city attorneys on this language, and is it approved by the city attorney?
I will recognize Attorney Anderson.
Excuse me, Councilmember Payne, Councilmember Chavez, and council members, I'm actually going to defer to Councilmember Rainville. My staff has been working with many members on amendments, and I don't know the answer to whether they were consulted on this.
Okay. I'll recognize Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you. It is my understanding, Councilmember Chavez, that my aide did work with the proper attorneys. I can't speak to the name of the attorney, but to city attorney or the clerks, do you see any issue with this language?
Mr. President, I think I can answer this question. I'm going to call him Patrick. I can't think of his last name off the top of my head. Mr. Sadler from the ward office did approach me for help in drafting the actual amendment before you. He worked with the attorney, Assistant Attorney Joel Fussy. I'm getting to it. I worked with Assistant City Attorney Joel Fussy, so I know he did consult with the attorney's office and then came and asked us for help in terms of just drafting assistance. So I think that it can be said that the council member's aide did in fact work with the attorney's office.
Council President.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Council President Payne. And again, I had a conversation before this with Councilmember Rainville, and I just want to ask that in the public record for transparency to make sure that, like, when this ordinance gets passed, that there's a record of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Chavez. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, President Payne, and thank you, Councilmember Rainville, for bringing this amendment forward. I have been hearing a lot from persons with disabilities, from low-income workers, about the potential impacts of this action that we are considering today. You know, I heard in earlier the slide presentation that potentially Metro Mobility might step into this space. I'm not sure if people understand how Metro Mobility works. You have to order it a day in advance. They pick you up, they drop you off, and then you may get picked up within 2 hours of whenever you leave. And so it is not necessarily a replacement for the type of service that Uber and Lyft or taxis provide that come at a time. It is a very onerous process, which is why they're able to keep the price at $5 per ride. So I'm not sure if that is a worthy substitute. But thank you again, Councilmember Rainville, for bringing this ordinance, this amendment forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins. Is there any other discussion on this amendment? Councilmember Palmisano.
Yes, I'd just like to share another perspective that certainly supports what Councilmember Jenkins has said, and it's another one that's rooted in the experience of a rideshare user. Yesterday, I received a message from a constituent whose young adult daughter has autism, and their daughter was just approved for a CADI, Community Access for Disability Inclusion Waiver, which allows her to use rideshare services rather than Metro Mobility. Her daughter works 4 hours a day, and on most occasions, the commute time on Metro Mobility is longer than her working hours. She's often late to work, or she has to leave early to meet the Metro Mobility schedule, only to have the bus be an hour or more late. So this seriously jeopardizes her employment, employment in a supported situation that's hugely beneficial and important to her independence. So when we talk about how this impacts the disability community, we're talking about it in a number of different ways. Thanks for letting me add that anecdote.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, President Payne. So in regards to, this idea that either Metro Mobility or the, private rideshare companies will just be firm replacements, I think what was shared by me in the slides and with the memo from Metro Mobility was saying that we do have options, and we have options in the private space and also existing options through the public. And of course, it's upon us to encourage those public options. And we understand, just like public transportation and our own services, there's a number of issues with them. But knowing that we have public options that residents are using and that they can use, because many residents don't often know that. Even Metro Mobility have these on-demand $5, programs that's meant directly for them. And also part of our own policy, be it through the climate equity plan, the transportation action plan, is for us to encourage the use of public transportation. So just want to make sure that, again, we're just saying we do have options and other companies and existing public programs that are ready to absorb any increased ridership should Uber and Lyft leave, just like what happened in Austin. Other options arose when Uber and Lyft left there, and they were able to fill that void, and we wanted to show that we have those options and resources present here too.
Thank you, Councilmember Wansley. Vice President Chuck Tai.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'm not sure that I heard a second to Councilmember Rainville's motion. I will formally do that so that we have a proper motion in front of us. And then second, just I know that this amendment by Councilmember Rainville came together just during this week. I'm really grateful that you're bringing this forward. I think it is really important for us to be measuring the impact and doing this type of evaluation on all of our ordinances that affect the delivery of services, the compensation of workers, anything of that sort. So I'm glad that we're doing that in a couple of these different amendments. Just quickly noting, though, that I know that there's probably several attorneys and clerks that have touched this ordinance at different times. So just for consistency's sake, there is a comma that's missing in your amendment. And I hope you'll accept a friendly amendment to add a comma between hours worked by drivers and comma, and the added cost of enforcement by the city. Yes, it's good. Everywhere else there's Oxford commas in the ordinance, so just being consistent.
Council President Payne, I will accept that as a friendly amendment to my friendly amendment, and I apologize for the English not being proper. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Vice President Chuck Tai. Councilmember Osman.
Thank you, Council President. I'll just make it quick that I do support this amendment from Councilmember Rainville, but I do want to really just kind of make you understand that we have heard the fear of Uber leaving or TNC leaving and the world is going to end. I'm going to say to you, is it okay? Is it okay to use the cheap labor of immigrant community? Is that makes it okay? Are we okay Uber is staying if they continue to use the cheap labor of back of the immigrant community? We care about the disability community. We care about the low-income families that use rideshare. But I'm sure they're not okay using the cheap labor. We're not asking any more than what the law say on the books. What we have on the books right now, it says we gotta pay. If you work in city of Minneapolis, if you own a business in city of Minneapolis, you gotta pay what the city law says, which is minimum wage. We're not asking above that. So this fear of fetal threatening or saying that the world is gonna end because Uber is leaving, well, know that the Uber drivers are people. They are people. They put us in here and they're asking the basics. I'm not okay. Uber is staying if they're gonna continue using the cheap labor of my community, of immigrant community, people of color. That doesn't make it okay. The fear of we're gonna pull out, otherwise let us use the immigrants' cheap labor, that doesn't make it okay. Doesn't matter who you are, a council member, a mayor, or governor. This fear of Uber leaving or TNC leaving does not make it okay. I just want to let you know that. I just want to put it out there that we're not asking any more than basics that's already on the law, in the books. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilmember Osmond. I'll remind the audience that we got to be focused on conducting the business of this meeting. I will recognize Councilmember Chowdhury.
Thank you, President Payne. I was wrestling with if I was going to get into queue on this, but Councilmember Osmond's comments really relayed to me that I felt that it was necessary for us to feel grounded in the push and pull that I think all council members are feeling up here today. I definitely was feeling it last night. I was staying up, especially around the conversation around our disability community and our drivers community. And what we have to zoom out and see in this is that we are working within a system right now with the corporations that are running rideshare where we're pitting working people and middle class people against each other, right? We're talking about supporting drivers who they're showing us across the country that they're not making enough to live and are also taking care of disabled community members and their family with the money that they're making. I know that's the case for our drivers here. I know who they're taking care of. And then we're talking about our disability community that needs a reliable service in order to get around our community. And they're relying on two corporations that have a monopoly on our city, and we're pitting people against each other. And I think we are a part of a larger national conversation about moving away from systems that pit the most marginalized against one another. And we should be striving to encourage systems like cooperatives that will work with our communities and support our disability community and support workers that are trying to make ends meet to support their families, and also supporting good public services. Like, I agree with Councilmember Jenkins. We need to improve metro mobility. We've been saying that for years, and now is the time because the need has grown, especially as we're looking at our aging population grow and the need for in-home care and just getting around and being able to have freedom to live your life and engage in your community. And it's just, it makes me feel sick that we're in a position where we have to choose between two communities. And I think we have an opportunity to push the conversation forward and how we can shift our market and shift the way that systems operate around something like mobility and fair pay in our city. And this is a part of it. We're not alone in this conversation in the city of Minneapolis. Our actions are impacting the state to have this conversation. We're in relationship to Massachusetts, where they've taken this conversation, Austin, Seattle, New York, and other cities that are going to continue to grow as we see larger cities like Denver, Phoenix grow and change, because people need to get around and people need to be able to live and pay for the things that they need in the city that they work in. So I just really wanted to zoom out and make that point as we're feeling this push and pull. It shouldn't be a position that we're in.
Thank you, Councilmember Chowdhury. Seeing no other discussion on the amendment, I'll ask the clerks to call the roll on the Rainville amendment, seconded by Vice President Chugtai.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osmond.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita is absent. Councilmember Ellison.
Here. Oh my God. Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries. And finally, we have one more amendment that is going to be brought forward by Councilmember Cashman. I will ask Councilmember Cashman to introduce that amendment.
Thank you, President Payne. This motion, or this amendment, is simply to move the effective date of the ordinance from April 1st to May 1st. We did hear from our staff at CPED that there are multiple new rideshare companies that have expressed interest in operating here in Minneapolis, called Pickup and Hitch, and that the application process, once the paperwork is submitted, takes 2 to 4 weeks to process, and saying that it is March 7th and that the effective date before was April 1st, which is only 3 weeks away. I offered this motion to amend the effective date to May 1st to give more time for those new companies to get online in our city.
Second.
That amendment has been moved and seconded by Councilmember Chavez. Is there any discussion on this amendment? I am adding myself to queue on this. I had an opportunity to meet with Lyft representatives, and I'll be supporting this amendment. They talked about the need to do some actual technical engineering work to recognize this law if it were to be passed, and they were concerned about their ability to make those types of accommodations. That was actually fundamentally the basis of why they were saying they would pull out of the market, is they felt that they would need to reassess their pricing structure and their algorithmic process for determining pricing to make sure that it aligned with the law. And so I think not only does this give time for new entrants to enter into the market, it also gives time for our existing legacy TNCs to make those adjustments so that we can have a smooth transition into this new reality. So I appreciate that. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. President, could you remind the audience that clapping is inappropriate?
Yes. We need to make sure that we're keeping silent as we're conducting our meeting. Echoing what Councilmember Rainville said, let's get through this business, and hopefully we can. And I'll actually call a recess after this vote so that folks who are supporting this can, go out into the hallway and kind of reset the room before we conduct the rest of the business. So thank you for that reminder, Councilmember Rainville. Councilmember Chowdhury.
I would just also, thank you, President Payne. I would just also like to note that this time before implementation provides us as council members to have conversations about data and information we will be receiving from the state, and that is something that I, as a member of this body, would really like to engage in a conversation in as we're getting that information from the state, and then have discussions with staff. I think it's a good time for us to prepare for follow-ups and things that are necessary in preparation for that 6-month evaluation.
Thank you for that comment. I will recognize Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I echo Councilmember Chowdhury's thoughts, and I'm just curious. I mean, there is conversations that are happening at the state, as was noted in the presentation, etc. If this ordinance should pass, and then we have a state ordinance, what happens in that scenario? I understand that a state resolution would likely supersede what is happening here, but I'm curious if the clerk or city attorney has an opinion.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Jenkins. I was going to actually suggest we take up that question on the main motion, but I see the city attorney's in queue, so I'll recognize Attorney Anderson.
Council President Payne, council members, Councilmember Jenkins, very likely any state law would supersede. Anytime there is a conflict between a state law and a municipal law, the state law always supersedes. Now, it's possible that the state legislature would write the state statute in a way that doesn't sort of preempt the field and would allow for, more robust laws at the municipal level. It really depends on what the state legislature, how they draft that, but I think you should probably anticipate it's most likely that it would supersede municipal law.
Thank you, Attorney Anderson. Councilmember Jenkins, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Chugtai.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to add here on what the state is doing right now, and the potential of our legislature taking up a bill on TNCs. What would happen? Just want to name that the authors here, they can of course jump in and speak for themselves, but we are, and so can our Intergovernmental Relations Committee chair, but we are in regular conversations with the authors and with the Minneapolis delegation in both the House and the Senate around how they're crafting their bill and restating again our position that we are opposed to preemption. And we know that we have plenty of partners at the legislature who also advocate and lobby there that are opposed to preemption, like the League of Minnesota Cities, other municipal governments. So, in the same way that Minneapolis has a higher minimum wage than the state mandated minimum wage, we'd hope, and we are in active conversation with the legislature on making sure that that whatever bill they pass, it has the flexibility for Minneapolis to not have conflict between this law or this ordinance and a potential state law.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, President Payne. Actually, Vice President Chuck Ty really emphasized the piece around us having local control or local authority, which is why we're able to have a minimum wage higher than the state. So recognizing, assuming we keep that local control, we will be able to have a minimum wage policy here for our drivers in alignment with what we already have on the books. And the state will proceed likely with crafting a statewide program, hopefully in alignment with their minimum wage too. So you really hit it on the head in terms of what I wanted to highlight.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Chowdhury.
I'll be very brief, President Payne, and I think it's just important information. In conversations with the author in the Senate, he is not interested in preempting the city of Minneapolis. Authors in the House, I've had conversations when I visited the Capitol with our majority leader on how important it is for us not to be preempted in any case, but in this case as well. And he has a vested interest in not preempting the city, and so that is front of mind for the folks in both chambers that are carrying this.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm not seeing anyone else in queue, but before I call the roll on this amendment, I wanted to recognize Councilmember Vitaw. I think you had stepped out during the Rainville amendment. Did you want to be recorded for the record on your position on that? On the disability reporting? Yes. Okay. Clerks, would we need to make a motion to rescind to do that, or does it, if there's no objection?
There's no objection. Is it a yes vote, a no vote? Yes vote.
Thank you for that. Seeing no other discussion on the Cashman amendment, I will ask the clerks to call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye. Let's see. I'm reading my name on the keyboard.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vitaw.
No.
Need a break.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes and 1 nay.
That amendment carries, and next we are on the main motion as amended. We have a queue in place for that main motion. Do we want to start from there with Councilmember Jenkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess, it was noted in the presentation that, particularly in the city of Austin, Uber and Lyft left and then came back. For clarity, they came back after a statewide agreement on the compensation, so just wanted to make that clarification that, these issues have broader implications than just the city that passes that. It really is a statewide issue. And if we want to be really concerned about all the drivers in the state of Minnesota, it really makes sense for us to really try to have a comparable compensation plan that supports all the drivers.
Thank you for that comment. I will recognize Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, President Payne. I'd like to move to delay item number 1 back 2 weeks to the City Council meeting on March 21st. I have received word from the state that the Department of Labor and Industry report on the compensation, well-being, and fair treatment of transportation network company drivers will be released tomorrow, Friday. This report is a result of Governor Walz's direction for the department to conduct a study to obtain and analyze data and information related to the working conditions of TNC drivers in Minnesota and how potential changes may impact access and costs for riders. I've been told that the department's report will make recommendations in regarding 1, the fair treatment of drivers, including potential pay compensation rates and standards, and 2, per minute, per mile recommendations for both the 7-county metro region based on the minimum wages in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and for greater Minnesota. We also know that the researchers producing this report are the same researchers used for Seattle and New York. Why is it good to wait for data and for this report? Because it's about good governance. It's about everyone having as much information as possible before making decisions that affect our everyday lives. After conversations with members of the legislature, I understand this matter is well on its way. We heard that from council members here too, to being brought forward and adopted this legislative session. And I was encouraged to move to delay this item 2 weeks as they believe the department's report and their subsequent conversations will be of importance and should be taken into consideration. Once the report is released tomorrow, we will all be able to talk from the same available data, including the information that we received today from our other colleagues. I believe it's in all of our best interests, the state, the city, drivers, passengers, and companies to move forward jointly, as doing so would almost certainly ensure stability throughout the city, region, and state. It would all but ensure that any market disruptions would be minimal and that the negative impacts on drivers and passengers would be minimal as well. Improving driver pay and stability are both key here, and I believe moving forward without all of the data that we could have that's coming just tomorrow risks that. I understand that there is still the possibility that after the 2-week delay, the state and city may not be in a position to move forward together. However, we can say that we tried, and I know we will have learned more than what we knew before, which we can only benefit and can only benefit everyone. Also, the City Council will still be in a position to adopt the ordinance before the effective date, including in the ordinance, which is now May 1st. I believe a 2-week delay will provide us with an opportunity to move forward together with the state legislature, gauge the state legislature's direction, and align ourselves accordingly, or at a minimum, review the department's report and adjust if necessary. Again, I've spoken with members of the legislature who encouraged this 2-week delay, and I've spoken with the Minnesota Uber Lyft Drivers Association, and they are receptive to this delay. I asked my colleagues today to evaluate the value of this delay on the potential impact and risk of instability for drivers and passengers, if moving forward together is indeed possible, and on the importance of our relationships and ability to work with the state. Thank you.
Councilmember Koski has moved to postpone the main motion to the March 21st meeting. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
I will call on Councilmember Jenkins for discussion.
Thank you, Council President Payne. I put myself in queue to second this motion by Councilmember Koski, and really appreciate you bringing it forward. It really speaks to the comments that I just made earlier, as well as my thoughts and sentiments around this issue since its inception. I think a broad policy is going to be more beneficial to our drivers, to consumers. I believe it does reflect good governance, and I think it is just the wise and prudent thing for us to be doing at this time. So I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Council President Payne. I won't be supporting this motion. And I get that we often will delay an item for a whole myriad of reasons. And so I'm not questioning whether the logic is there. I think the logic might be there. Here's why I think there's a problem. The problem is that we have vetted this issue several times. The state has vetted this issue. We have vetted this issue and faced a veto. We're taking this issue up again, and we have riders in the room. And I understand that council members might have individual conversations, and I don't want to say that there's like a misrepresentation of any conversation that's been had. But when I'm looking out in the room, I have not heard from riders that they're okay with the delay. And we've got folks here in the room who are expecting us to take up this issue today. And I think that those questions, I think all the questions that we have, all the information that we have before us is enough for us to go ahead and make a decision. Another reason that I don't support delay, and I'll wrap it up with this, is that when the state was taking up this issue, when there was a veto at the state, there was this long amount of information. There was this long pause where we were supposed to get information. There was a work group that was supposed to produce a pathway forward. And not to sort of summarize or oversimplify, but that path didn't actually emerge at the state. It was just more of the same, right? It was the people who began the process with their opinions still had those same opinions after the process was concluded. I think that that's what's going to happen here, and I think that a delay only serves for us to have this conversation again on March 21st. I stand in solidarity with Councilmember Rainville, who feels, we both need a break whenever our names come up in the roll call because the conversation's been so long. I don't look forward to doing that again. So for those reasons, I think that we have enough information. I think that this issue has been well vetted, and I think that we risk demoralizing a base of our constituents which I think is likely, if we come back on March 21st with everyone sort of sharing the same opinion that they have and not really actually feeling more informed as promised. So that's why I won't be supporting the motion, and I hope we can take this issue up today.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellison. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking a little bit about what Councilmember Osman said earlier. I think he really got to the core of the argument here about fair pay and equitable pay, and that is, and who determines what formula is correct. The policies we make as a city don't exist in a vacuum. We have a responsibility to weigh the impacts, both positive and negative, of any proposal that comes before us. And we have to consider the unintended, albeit very significant impacts of enacting an ordinance right now. It's not okay to impose inequitable labor on anyone here. And no one gets a raise if our TNCs leave the city of Minneapolis. And I caution that we'll be making that decision for drivers and riders that depend on it. So I think we should at least do so with the data that's coming out tomorrow, and which I acknowledge is a long time in coming. This city council is literally taking away jobs altogether if everybody is putting all of their information honestly and earnestly on the table. I'm not interested in calling somebody's bluff here. That feels risky, to be taking away people's jobs. We're also taking away people's ability to get to work, doctor's appointments, and more. And I think one way to encourage the supportive nature that Councilmember Chowarty rightly points out is our shared ideals here, is to work together with state leaders and information coming out tomorrow. We're putting ourselves in an otherwise reckless position, is what I fear. So I am supportive of this 2-week delay. Thank you.
Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President Payne. So I want to be clear. We have delayed this matter several times now. We delayed it when it was vetoed back in August. It was delayed 2 years ago when drivers came and asked the mayor, asked this body to say, can you pass not fair wages, but minimum compensation? We don't want a raise. We want what over 70,000 other workers already have in your city that as a body we passed back in 2018. So that is what we have the opportunity to pass. And that is going to be a very different aim than what the state is needing to do. They have a different minimum wage than what we have. And hopefully they have a program that not only complements ours, but reaches their minimum wage too for their statewide program. And I just also want to say thank you to Councilmember Ellison for reaffirming the validity and credibility of our study that we've done here through the rate analysis from CPAD, and then once again through our policy and research division. We have a tailor-made rate calculation designed for Minneapolis that was not only vetted by our city subject matter experts, but in consultation with national experts who agree it aligns with precedents from other cities, both economically and legally. Also, the rates in the ordinance depend on static factors, such as federal mileage reimbursement rates, federal labor laws around break times, also the cost of fuel, the cost of vehicle maintenance, and the average amount of time that drivers have riders in the car. These are static factors that a state study will not just simply change. I also want to highlight that, I find it concerning to put all our eggs in a basket of state action again, as Councilmember Ellison highlighted. We were told that last fall. Don't move forward with this policy because the state is going to do it, and that did not come into fruition. Also, I will note that just in the past 24 hours that I even came to learn about this study, I was told that it was coming out at the end of the month, and then next week, and then all of a sudden now it's coming out Friday. That's very concerning that there is a shifting goalpost around a state study as significant from the Department of Labor and Industry Standards. I know that didn't happen with our investigative report from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights of just having changing goalposts of like significant state studies. So I'm very concerned even about that in the past 24 hours that I've been told there's a release date that has varied across the board. So I just want to emphasize we have the opportunity to take action today. I know Eid has told me, the president of MOLDA, that he wants to see this council take action today, not 2 weeks from now. We have an ordinance in front of us right now that will get drivers minimum wage, and we should proceed with that and rip the Band-Aid off. Just do it.
Thank you, Councilmember Wanzi. Vice President Chagtai.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really appreciate the discussion here today. And I've had a chance to talk with the author of this motion to postpone, Councilmember Koski, several times over the course of this week. And while I won't be supporting this motion to delay today, I do want to appreciate and thank you, Councilmember, for your time. I understand the intent of what you're trying to do, and I don't want that to go unsaid. I think you've done a lot of due diligence and are making a point that's consistent with your goals and with the outcome. I won't be supporting this motion today for a few different reasons. I've also had the opportunity in the last couple of days to talk to a number of members of our House and Senate delegations in Minneapolis, along with the Commissioner of the Department of Labor and Industry, and I think I would just caution us against putting too much weight to one member of the legislature who's saying to us, I think it might make sense to delay for a couple of weeks and see if there can perhaps be a study that comes out that can supplement your decision making, because we have members saying both things, right? We've got one that's saying I support a 2-week delay, and we've got a number that are saying I don't support a 2-week delay. I think it's helpful to me as a Minneapolis resident and as a policymaker who is carrying this body of work at the state that you continue on doing your work. I agree with, the sentiment around we have done our very best to be good partners to the state. Actually, this policy didn't start at the Minneapolis level. The first time we took a vote on this policy was after the conclusion of the legislative session, and the primary advocacy was at the state level. There was a bill that was passed with bipartisan support in both chambers, and then was ultimately vetoed by the governor. Then there was a task force that was created, and it was sort of told to us, and the task force kind of overshadowed a lot of the conversations we were having when we were considering this ordinance in the fall last year. And I heard, and I thought it was a critique that had logic that was sound, a critique of sound logic to say, I don't think that I can support this ordinance because the state will take action soon. At that time, the going belief was the governor had created this task force, and at the conclusion of their work, they would come back and they would make recommendations for compensation models. That didn't end up happening. At the end of December, they concluded and did not come out with a recommendation. And now we've got the study that sort of came after that. The work on it started in January, and has continued until now. And I'll say, while off of on the public record is that there is a study coming out at some point in March. And so if we don't see a study come out tomorrow, which it may not, we could see one coming on March 22nd, and then we'll be faced with the same exact type of decision 2 weeks from now. I think that is going to, just it's slowing down our work without a really compelling argument to me today, right now. And then I'll name on the compensation study itself too. Again, we won't find magic answers there in the same way we didn't find them with the task force, in the same way we didn't find them through state action last year. And so just to name what we can expect to see in a study whenever it does become public is some recommended scales that can apply, that are looking at the entire state. So Minneapolis is going to be lumped in with the entire 7-county metro in the work that's happening at the state. So we are the models or scales that are going to be presented for Minneapolis presumably will also take into account the impact on other cities in the 7-county metro that don't have the same minimum wage that Minneapolis does. So, for example, the recommendations will impact Belle Plaine and Blaine and Forest Lake just the same as Minneapolis and St. Paul. Minneapolis and St. Paul have a discrepancy in their minimum wages. Minneapolis's minimum wage is $15.57, whereas St. Paul's is $15.19. So we should take those things as a grain of salt to know that there won't be, while the study that the state is conducting is really important, it's the largest study ever done into data from Uber and Lyft, and it has value, and I look forward to reading it. I don't think that it impacts, or I don't think that it is, that our action today is contingent on that. This study this ordinance and the compensation models that are before us are rooted in data too. They're rooted in the data based off of what other jurisdictions have done and how they conducted their rate models. It's adjusted for Minneapolis's market. And frankly, I have a lot of trust in our staff at the City of Minneapolis that put in work over the last year into determining how to put together this policy, and I have a lot of trust that they are looking at, that Minneapolis staff is looking specifically at the impact in Minneapolis, whereas statewide staff are looking at the impact on the entire state. And while those two things go hand in hand, our job here is to focus on Minneapolis. I apologize, I've run out my time.
Thank you, Vice President Chugtai. Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, President Payne. So, like Councilmember Koski and Councilmember Chugtai, I've also spoken to our state legislators who live in Minneapolis, both in the House and Senate, and also received mixed messages on timing and actions coming out of the state. And so for that reason, I don't think that we can necessarily plan our actions based on theirs, although I do hope that they will take our ordinance and complement that with a statewide program. I also think that, we moved the effective date of this ordinance to May 1st. We also have evaluation mechanisms set up for 6 months and a year from now through the amendments made by Councilmember Rainville and Councilmember Koski. So we will have several opportunities to evaluate our progress on this issue. And so for that reason, I don't think we should delay our vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cashman. Councilmember Chowdhury.
Thank you, President Payne. I will just start off by saying that data coming tomorrow was very tempting for me, right? Because there's an opportunity to see Minnesota data. And the question that I wrestled with after thinking a lot about it is if Lyft was able to give aggregate data on rides in Minneapolis, specifically to the state, and then across the state, and then the 7-county metro, there were multiple opportunities where they could have sent that to our city council and our staff. They could have done that. It wasn't a matter of we needed to give them permission to give us that information. And that to me, it's just, I think we should hold that as a question as to why they didn't offer that data to us when it was available to offer to the state, and then we could have conducted our own process as well, because we've indicated that we do our own process. We're not governed by how the state is moving, and we provided that opportunity. With that said, I think, like, I've had good conversations with members of the body that are supporting this ordinance moving forward, and a couple of the authors on this as well. If we, for any reason, the goal is $15.57, which is the minimum wage that we guarantee to any business or any worker in any business in the city of Minneapolis, what we should strive for, that we do have and that has been made available to us on $15.57. And I'm glad that the researchers in Seattle that did the work on Seattle and Seattle and New York are handling the work there. Like, for any reason, if we're not meeting that $15.57, we're going over, we can adjust that. And I think the stopgaps that we put in place today assure that we have an ability to make corrections if necessary. Like, I don't think the sky is falling on this if we proceed. We have opportunities, again, with that implementation date moving to May, and then opportunities for evaluation, and then even before May, if there is an urgency within this body where we feel like we need to make a significant change based off of data, there is an opportunity for us to have that discussion and act upon it. And I would encourage all members of the body and our authors to consider that as an option that we can have. But I also feel pretty confident that our numbers aren't going to be significantly off if we're basing it off of 1557 in the city of Minneapolis, and then that's what the state's taking a look at. And I'll just finally say that, like, Austin, in terms of the state framework, is not a good example of good legislation. They revoked pretty much all of the standards that Austin put forward, and then said that Uber and Lyft had to pay like an annual fee of $5,000 and had to go through a licensing process, and it was signed by a Republican governor, and then Republican members also included an amendment that was anti-trans and our gender nonconforming community. And when Uber and Lyft left Austin, there were multiple rideshare companies that were local that came into fruition, and it opened up the market and broke up monopolies, which is something that we need to hold in this body as well. Is that a bad thing to occur? Is that an opportunity that we should seek? Because right now we have two large companies that are holding the entirety of our rideshare economy, and also participated in ending the booming taxi industry when we had 1,200 drivers who were taxi drivers here previously. Now we don't have that anymore. And I'll just rest my case with why I don't necessarily feel like a delay is necessary in this moment is the memo that our city staff, Amy Lingo, sent on the on info from publicly traded companies on the earnings that these companies have had, showing that in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 of 2023 that there were multiple billions of dollars in earnings for Uber, and same with Lyft.
Thank you, Councilmember Chowdhury. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to point out other information here and make sure we're all dealing with the same set of facts. Not only have we been informed by state leaders that this report is coming out tomorrow, this report's recommendations include adherence to our Minneapolis minimum wage, not that of any other place that has adopted a minimum wage. So I really don't think that Minneapolis is leading the way here. I think that it's tempting massive upheaval, and I think it's tempting preemption. And I don't think that it's helpful as the state works hard to get broad enough support to pass something that would be addressing an issue that's really regional. So just wanted to add that into the thought process here and add that to my previous comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I think we just approved Councilmember Cashman's memo that this goes into effect May 1st. So I'm not sure why a 2-week delay to wait to see what comes out of the state. It won't impact this thing moving forward. So more information as a deliberative government body seems like the prudent thing to do, which is again why I'm supporting the Koski motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins. I put myself in queue first to thank Council members Koski, Cashman, and Rainville for their amendments. I think that makes this a better ordinance. And specifically, I wanted to speak at a higher level about the role of local government and kind of some of my philosophy about this, which is I think we need to be the most responsive form of government that's available to our residents. And I want us to think about this, and I think Councilmember Chowdhury raised this. We should be thinking about our ability to be agile when it comes to these types of issues. And, you know, when I look at Uber and Lyft as companies, Uber was founded in 2009. Lyft was founded in 2012. Lyft just had its first profitable quarter, not year, quarter, last quarter, 2 quarters ago, actually. And I think Uber had its first profitable year since its founding last year. So these are companies that have been saying, trust us. We're going to be this tremendous value to investors. We're going to be this tremendous benefit to the community. It's just going to take us a little bit of time to prove the model out. And I would say after more than a decade, we have the evidence that we need, which is these companies can't deliver this service with equitable pay at a rate that is affordable to everyday people. And when I met with Lyft specifically, because Uber didn't do very much outreach on us, but I did get to meet with Lyft representatives, and they were, I thought, very sincere in their commitment to pay equity. I really took them at their word on that. Even when you take them at their word, you have to measure it with their commitment to profitability. These companies are deeply committed to being profitable. Their life depends on it. And they still haven't been able to deliver on that in a consistent way. So you should hold their commitment to drivers at the same standard as you hold their commitment to profitability, and they are struggling to make a profit with their current business model. So that says to me that the business model isn't working. And that's before you even talk about regulation. And they've done this experiment on how this new model of moving people about a city works. They've done this experiment for 10 years, and they've done this experiment on the back of workers. And it's time to stop making our residents, especially our marginalized residents, the subject matter of corporate experimentation. It's time for us to recognize that we have a responsibility as elected leaders to think about the interests that go beyond the profitability of any individual corporation. We have to think about the interests of our residents and them being able to live fulfilling lives in our city. And so I actually really also struggled, like Councilmember Chowdhury did, with the fact that, hey, if this data is going to come out tomorrow, I would really like that to inform this law. And thanks to the foresight of Councilmember Cashman, we do have that time. If there is a revelatory piece of information that comes out through this analysis, we have until May 1st to look at the impact of, or at least the difference between what the state is suggesting and what our own professional staff are suggesting. And I think there's an opportunity, and we should take that opportunity up to reflect the ability for us to be agile when it comes to weighing the needs of our residents and the broader ecosystem within our city. So those are my comments. That's why I won't be supporting a 2-week delay, but I do support taking that data from the state and making sure that it is informing this policy going forward. And I especially appreciate Councilmember Koski's amendment around this ongoing evaluation about the impact of this. I think that's really smart. It makes us more responsive, and it makes us proactive when we see that the goals of this ordinance are maybe not being achieved, so that we can actually make some modification to it. And I'd welcome and encourage that. So with that, I will ask the clerks to call the roll on the amendment or the motion to postpone.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
No.
Councilmember Cashman.
No.
Councilmember Osman.
No.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
No.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
No.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Nay.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Shugtai.
No.
President Payne.
No.
There are 5 ayes and 8 nays.
That motion fails, and now we are on to the underlying main motion, and I will recognize Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Council President Payne. I just wanted to quickly speak about the experience I've had and speak to why I'm going to be voting the way that I'm voting. So initially, you know, Councilmember Osman reached out to me a couple years ago and said he had this group that was in the hallway, wanted to talk about their experience as transportation rideshare drivers. We had a great first introduction. What I heard originally from the drivers was that it was dangerous being drivers and that they were being unjustly kicked off the apps by Uber and Lyft and other transportation rideshare companies, and they needed some help ensuring that that was not going to happen to them because it was preventing huge barriers to them supporting their families. I 100% understood that. I've had lots of meetings with the groups over these couple of years and talked through that. Now, somewhere the conversations have shifted, and things just kind of changed. And so over the last year, I've had time to speak with other drivers outside of the drivers who come to City Hall. I, this week alone, have met with lots of drivers that live in my ward or live in North Minneapolis, and they've shared their experiences with me. I will say, I don't expect anyone who drives for these companies to show up at a council meeting and say, don't give me more money. No one is going to do that. So, you know, I have conversations with folks in my ward. Folks have shown me receipts from the apps. I have not seen anyone show me that they've made less than $15 an hour. Some of the challenges that I've shared with the drivers is the ward that I represent. People don't want to come to North Minneapolis. Some drivers are scared of North Minneapolis. So that's been the issue for people I represent on both sides. I have a driver in my ward who I met with that is okay with people not coming to North Minneapolis because he sees it as his territory and he makes really good money because some folks are scared to come there. I've talked to drivers who've shown me their tax documents where only $6,000 or $45,000 is taxable income. That's a good deal. I don't know, like, if there's mechanisms in place for folks to do their taxes a certain way, or like what. But what I saw was Lyft, like, actually create a document for this driver to take in to have their taxes done. And this driver, who actually lives on my block, bless you, is my neighbor, is happy with Uber, Lyft being his primary job, making $45,000 a year, and being able to stay home with his children while his wife works a 9 to 5. This is the type of job he wants. He also talked to me about, getting 23 cents off of every gallon of gas for participating gas stations. And we also just kind of talked about the more personal parts of the job. This person looks forward to picking up families in the morning in North Minneapolis. It's like a regular thing. I have people in my ward who are going to school, who are going to work, who are going to medical visits that need this mode of transportation. They don't have the ability to own a car and pay the expenses that come with a car. They don't have, they don't want to take Metro Mobility because it takes so long, because you could be stuck somewhere for 2 hours waiting on the ride to pick you up and your kids are somewhere else. They can afford Uber and Lyft services. I have people in my ward who appreciate it as a service to use and also a service to give. I would just say North Minneapolis as a whole, Councilmember Ellison, because I did talk to people who live in Ward 5 but Northside residents, lots of them, who are drivers of Uber and Lyft. And so I asked Councilmember Osman to show me documentation where people made less than $15 an hour, because I saw something different from all the riders all the drivers that I met with. I did not see the numbers that was given at the last biz meeting. I think there was someone who said they made $11 or something. I'm just throwing a number out there on like a $60 fare. The other thing I was told by drivers was when you go to the airport versus somewhere else, there's additional money taken out for going to the airport versus going to the Mall of America. A driver showed me how much it would cost for me to go to the Mall of America, which is a half a mile away from the airport. There was a $17 difference in the fare, and that's because the airport charges a fee, and that has nothing to do with Uber and Lyft. And so, as I started out saying, when the drivers reached out to me, I understood the safety issues, the issues around being kicked off the app, all those things. And they even said to me, Councilmember, we want to work with you. We know people won't pick up in North Minneapolis. We want to make that better. That is what we see ourselves working on together. And those things have kind of got lost in this argument that I haven't seen proof of. So today, I will not be supporting this. And I'm willing to continue to do the work to figure out like what it is we need to do to make sure that drivers are receiving the pay that they deserve. And also, I just think we don't acknowledge that they're contractors. This is a different profession than the person who works at McDonald's. McDonald's, you get a 9 to 5 shift. Uber and Lyft, you can pick up and drop off when and whatever you feel like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Vita. Councilmember Chavez.
Council President Payne. The goal of our ordinance is to make sure that everyone makes the city's minimum wage. Yes, some workers can make that, but not every driver in Minneapolis does so. I believe our drivers when they tell us these facts. We personally reached out to every single council member about this, and not every council member reached back out to us to set up a meeting to discuss this policy. For over a year now, my office, along with Councilmember Wansley, Councilmember Osman, have been working tirelessly with drivers and riders in Minneapolis, city staff, and national experts to develop this minimum wage policy. We had various community engagement sessions, multiple conversations with council members to receive input, met with the mayor, and even met with rideshare companies. Simply put, we've done our homework. The diverse residents of Ward 9, the South Side, believe that our drivers should be compensated fairly. My residents, many of whom are these drivers in particular, have been underpaid. marginalized, and denied decent working conditions, which is why they're pushing for this ordinance today. The conversations we are having about fair compensation is a little bit different because it's not about doubling wages. It's that particular conversation is about putting corporations, unfortunately, over people. And that conversation is about paying unfair wages to residents of Minneapolis. And it means nothing to our workers when the offer on the table is still poverty. Our ordinance, the one we are pushing, is an opportunity for our workers in Minneapolis to be uplifted, many of whom are being paid poverty wages and deserve this ordinance to keep a roof over their heads, food on the table, to pay for their child care, support their family, and more. These drivers pick us up to go see the doctor. They pick us up to go get our groceries. They take us from point A to point B when we are personally experiencing emergencies. And they even drive us during horrible weather conditions. Our drivers deserve to be paid fairly. Rideshare companies tend to use these tactics, saying they will leave cities when residents are pushing for fair wages. It's another effort to kill ordinances or legislations that holds corporations accountable and allows for the exploitation of workers. Workers should not live in poverty because of corporate greed. And today, on the week of action, where hundreds of workers are out on the street in Minneapolis demanding better working conditions, we can and will stand firmly with workers in Minneapolis. I am proud to vote in favor of this ordinance today and stand firmly against corporate greed and in support of our drivers, many of whom are people of color and immigrants in Minneapolis. And like Councilmember Osman said, against cheap labor on the back of people of color and immigrants. Our community is tired. This vote today is simple. It's about supporting our minority community members and workers across Minneapolis. If employers leave because they are paying sub-minimum wages and companies who pay the minimum wage step in, then I think that's a win for the community. If we find that this study from the state shows us information that's important to our policymaking as an author of this ordinance, I'm more than committed to improving and amending this ordinance moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chavez. Councilmember Osman.
Council President, I just want to touch a few things Councilmember Fita said. She said that the conversation has shifted to minimum wage. Before it was about safety protection, deactivation. There's so many suffering and so many things that are happening to drivers. Today we're only talking about one thing, but in the past, the rideshare work protection ordinance last year, Mayor Jacob vetoed it overall, including the pay. It was before it was about the safety of the drivers, their rights of due process. You know, they do suffer many different challenges about the person they're picking up. There are safety concerns. Some of the drivers came here with bloody shirts. We have seen that. Their application or this application is being basically deactivated. One morning you're ready to go to work and guess what? It's deactivated. There's no due process. There's no other person on the other side to talk to you. It's an AI or a computer that's communicating with you. So that is not work. There's no protection on that. We really haven't even opened those challenges, and that has been vetoed. We believe that we will come back to continue fight for the drivers, but today, just coming back, it's the minimum wage equivalent to what we're talking about. We have seen the public hearing on Biz committee that people come and show photos or evidence, actual evidence they had in their apps. The individuals that were saying there, well, it was snowing night and the drivers, there are options to pick up someone to $93 to the airport, but they were offering drivers $11. Where is where is that? I get it that Uber can take whatever they want home, but we want them to pay drivers something equivalent to minimum wage. So yeah, just want to kind of comment on that, talk about the safe protection, deactivation due process. We haven't even discussed that page yet, but we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Osman. Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, President Payne. I just want to thank my fellow council members for their consideration of a 2-week delay. I understand all of your motivations for voting as you did for or against a delay. I requested a 2-week delay because the state's report is what I needed, what I need to get to a confident yes. I support TNC drivers. I support them receiving fair wages. I support them receiving fair treatment. But without assurance regarding stability and without the DLI's report, I just don't feel confident in my vote today. For those reasons, I'll be voting no today and continue to stand with the importance of having as much information as possible before making a decision. However, I want to let my fellow council members and the public know that if this is vetoed, which has been indicated could happen, I will reconsider my vote on the veto override vote, as by then I will have the state's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Koski. Seeing no other discussion, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
No.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
No.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Nay.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
No.
Vice President Shugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 9 ayes and 4 nays.
That carries, and that item is adopted. We will be taking a brief recess to allow folks to reset the room. Let's return back at the dais at 12:40.